I'm very ill at the moment, so I do apologize. But I wanted to go through some of the controversies of Batman v Superman. I meant to talk about it a while ago and talk about the percentage that this movie has got on Rotten Tomatoes and what people are thinking about it and how people are jumping on a bandwagon about everything about the movie. Now, I'm going to fully admit something. Before anyone judges me, you can check my channel and you will realize that I was one of, and still am to a certain degree, a big hater of Zack Snyder. I thought what he did when Man of Steel was awful. I still think what he's done to the Superman character, the character of Superman, is somewhat unforgivable. But I can forgive someone of creating new interpretations of the character if at least the story that it serves is good. And that brings me to Batman v Superman. 28% on Rotten Tomatoes. Probably not going to turn a profit for DC Comics. People hating on it, hating on every aspect of it, from the casting to the dialogue to the storytelling, and the lack of coherence in the storytelling. People who claim to be comic fans and die-hard comic fans who don't get the references and think there's too many jokes who are inside references, yet they're die-hard comic fans. And people who quite frankly are just too stupid to understand the movie. It's bizarre to me. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that I'm gonna fully admit I was against Jesse Isaac being cast as Lex Luthor. I was against Ben Affleck, really against Ben Affleck being cast as Batman. You can check on my channel. I rant on it. I'm fully admitting it. I'm coming out and saying that I thought this. I was not against Gal Gadot being cast as Wonder Woman, but I was extremely suspicious. I thought Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is, and still to this day think, is an abomination. And severely misunderstands the Superman character, as I think with Batman v Superman. But you have to start off with this. How does this movie get 30% on 28% on Rotten Tomatoes? I just want to look at something. Now, Age of Ultron is a film in which, obviously people are talking about the plot of this movie, how it's so hard to follow, and I'm going to give you some very good examples throughout this review of why Man of Steel is not Batman v Superman is not in fact hard to follow. That it's really quite simple. I'm going to talk about the narrative style and the chopping and editing of it, which I do think was flawed. I'm not saying this is a perfect movie by any means. Trust me, I don't think Zack Snyder has it in him to make a perfect movie. But it's an interesting movie. It's a movie that takes a lot of chances, and I appreciate that in filmmaking, and I think comic book fans should appreciate someone trying to do something more something different more operatic and epic in scale, that for once takes this superhero mythology seriously, rather than having jokes. You know, Deadpool, for instance, I think is a great movie, but I mean, even to the end, he's cracking jokes. When his girlfriend is in peril, he's cracking jokes. There can't be one moment of like, hey, this is a serious situation that demands me not be the coolest guy in you know, the fonts, you know, where I have to actually be human and understand, or if not human, because he's kind of beyond that, but at least emotionally respond in a way that would relate to a human being who sees his loved one in peril. You know, the third act for me of Deadpool ruined a lot of the movie, a lot of the build-up, which I thought was great. Now, Age of Ultron, which is an awful movie, but I would still give that a good 70%, something like that. It's an awful movie, though. And, you know, you have a completely absurd villain who's indistinguishable from the hero, who's just another wisecracking asshole like the rest of the Marvel characters, who I love all of that, don't get me wrong. But it's when I see a movie like this bashed to that degree. I mean, do you know how bad it is? Even Man of Steel, as awful a movie as I think Man of Steel is, even that does not deserve 28% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, really, 28%? Man of Steel, a movie I think sucked. I think the dialogue sucked. I think the villain sucked. I thought the story arc, I thought the fact that the hero didn't have a personality at all. It all sucked. And even that didn't deserve 28% on Rotten Tomatoes. For me, a guy who's a die-hard hater of the movie, believes it's about the right score on Rotten Tomatoes, or like around the 55% to 60% score. You know, I expected a lot more of a Superman movie. I was extremely disappointed. But I'm not going to let that disappointment, you know, color my my review of Man of Steel, because it's still a movie that is watchable. I would say Dark Knight Rises, another movie I completely despise. I love the Dark Knight. I love Batman Begins. You know, I love the Avengers. I love Guardians of the Galaxy. I think Captain America Winter Soldier is very, very good. You know, these are the prime comic movies. I think The Watchmen is a very underrated movie. Just to show, like, I'm not always hating Zack Snyder. I think that's an incredibly underrated movie. I think it's one of the best comic book movies. I like Sin City. I like, you know, a lot of comic book movies. But I think a lot of them are really, really overrated as well. I think a lot of them are really, really overrated. And I would say that, you know, you look at something like, I mean, goddamn, Iron Man 2 has a better rating than Batman v Superman, and that's just as messy and caught up in trying to establish a whole universe as you know, as Batman v Superman. I mean, and just full of just dumb jokes after joke after joke. Everything is a quip in the Marvel universe. There's no real depth to the characters. It's like, I think for me, Captain America is one of the more interesting characters, because he's more level-headed and not always like, it's not always reduced. His character isn't reduced to some kind of, quick one-liner. It's like the whole Marvel universe is kind of, and I love, like, obviously the Daredevil series, which is brilliant. What they've done with, with the Punisher and Daredevil, and what they've done with Kingpin. I think it's brilliant. And I don't want Marvel to do that in their cinematic universe. I don't wish them to do that in their cinematic universe necessarily. But the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that fun aspect of those movies is tolerable to a point, and it's going to get old real quick, and wanting or desiring DC to somehow follow that mold in what the critics are saying is just absurd to me, and there's no reason for it. There's no reason for it. So I'm going to go through some things that really stood out in the critiques for me. So, first of all, something that stands out. The whole, the whole situation. I wanted to go in order, but I'm just going to do it as I think of it. I'm sorry. So the whole situation with Martha, which has become almost a running joke of the critique. By the way, this is a spoilers. This is going to have a lot of spoilers in it, so if you haven't seen the movie, obviously go and watch it. So, the whole thing with Martha. Now, as an avid comic book fan and reader, here's what happens. Superman's fighting Batman. Batman has the upper hand. He's about to kill Superman with a kryptonite spear, and Superman shouts out, "They're gonna kill Martha, you've got to help Martha." Which is dumb, because Superman should have just said "my mother." It doesn't make sense. It's obviously for the sake of the narrative that he says Martha. But that aside, that's not. If you want to knock a point off, 3 points off that for convenience of the script, that they couldn't work a way around that, fine. I understand that. He shouldn't have said Martha, he should have said "my mother." But hey, it's a film. He said Martha. Now, anyone who knows the Batman mythos, the supposed Batman aficionados who are so into Batman, who are saying and criticizing this movie on the basis of a plot point, by the way, as opposed to the whole, movie, the fight ended because they had the same mother's name. No, it didn't, you fucking morons. One of the good things about this film is it didn't spoon feed people. It expected people to have a certain level of intelligence, and especially comic lovers and readers, to understand and perhaps explain to those who are less knowledgeable about the mythology what was going on in those scenes. Okay? Now, clearly, what that scene is supposed to be saying is that Batman has a kind of flashback to the fact that what is the one thing above all things, above even the desire to kill this huge threat to human civilization, who really isn't a threat to human civilization because he's actually a good guy and he's not done anything to just demonstrate to Batman otherwise. Okay? But what is the one thing that Batman would want to do more than anything else in the whole of his whole mythology? As a Batman fan, you ought to know this. It's save his parents and never have to become Batman in the first place. never have to bear that burden, the pain inside. To as Christian Bale eloquently put it in Batman Begins, the pain had gone so much inside him that all it had become is pure rage. He would do anything to take that away and to bring his parents back. And when Superman says, "You've got to save Martha," the whole point of that scene is it triggers in Batman's mind that in fact he has the opportunity to save his mother, even if it's a surrogate, figure who is in place of his mother. He now has the opportunity to save his mother. It's not that Superman and Batman's mother are the same. That ends the fight. No, it was the fact that that triggers something primal and psychological in Batman, where he's like, it's like he's substituting Superman's mother for his own, and he's going to save his own mother, which means he acts brutally in doing so, because he'll do anything to do it. And yes, there is a problem with the script here, and I will be I'm going to be fair, because I think this movie isn't a perfect movie. It's a Zack Snyder beautiful disaster, and if you ask me, I don't think he should be directing, really the Justice League at all. I think, if anything, he should direct the Batman movie, and Ben Affleck maybe direct Justice League, or direct something else. I don't know, because I think he's actually fairly good at Batman, and it's what he should have done in the first place, since he has obviously far more interest in the Batman character than he does in Superman. But anyway, with all that said, that is what is going on in that scene. It's a psychological trigger, and the writer, or Zack Snyder, should have hammered that home for an audience who clearly didn't get the subtlety of that moment and what was going on in it. And he should have doubled down on the point, instead of having that one moment of levity, which was nice, when he saves Martha and he's like, I'm your son's friend or something. Instead of having that moment of levity where she's like, "Oh, I could tell from the cape," he should have said, "Mom, I mean Martha," or something like that, where it showed that he felt like that was his opportunity to make up for the fact he was defenseless to save his own parents. That is the point of that. Now, going on to, God, there's so much wrong with the reviews of this movie. It's unbelievable. Let's go on to the structure. I'm just going to randomly pick. Now, the structure of this movie, if you know anything about Chris Terrio, you know that he researches and studies what the writer of this of Batman vs Superman. His research and study led him to do something that may have been interesting, but made perhaps a flawed script. And I'm not saying the script is not flawed. He got so, I think, into comic book mythology and comic book lore, studying this stuff, that he decided to make the film a literal homage to the graphic novel style, the epic DC crossover graphic novel style, where you have the Batman and you have Superman and you have Wonder Woman as the main characters, and a little what would you call it, little um, cameos by Flash or Green Lantern, something like Red Sun or something like that, or you know, or the Dark Knight Returns, or you know, he literally decided to homage those comics, because you'll notice how those comics, the way the storytelling is told with all the different characters, there isn't such a linear form to it. It was like Zack Snyder was trying to make a graphic novel come to life, even more so than what he did with The Watchmen. I mean, The Watchmen was far more linear in its storytelling and following of one character and one perspective, which was really Rorschach's. You know, the whole way through. This movie, on the other hand, really took that. I mean, there's a lot of graphic novels, especially in the DC lore, which have that, where it's just one character and then you follow another character and you follow another character, and it all is building to this massive crescendo at the end where it's a big epic kind of battle between the bad guy and the good guy. When you have those things like Kingdom Come or something like that, which is another great DC graphic novel. Essentially, the whole movie, especially in the writing, is a homage to that. So if you don't understand comic books, if you're looking at the film from the perspective of, is it well written as a 3-story arc film with with the progression of the hero taking a very linear he has his average life, the obstacle that comes in his way, the inciting incident, the call to adventure, the meeting of the kind of friends who will help him on the adventure, and then the resolution. If you're looking at film in that kind of sense, no, it doesn't fit that mold. That's what the Marvel movies do. They turn, which is great by the way, they turn the comic books into movies. They really translate their comic books into film, like into that film mold, like that 3-story arc, like Ant-Man and Iron Man. That's why all the Marvel films seem very similar, to be honest. And in some ways you can exchange one from the other, and it's why their villains aren't very interesting either, because they follow that mold so much, and they don't make any bold decisions with their characters, not so far anyway, apart from, I think, with the TV series Daredevil, where they have broken that mold. But and they've brought the Daredevil comic book somewhat to life, but still it's got that very linear structure, that TV show as well. It's got a very, whereas, so what I'm saying is that Marvel are translating their movies, their comic book characters into that movie format that moviegoers are more familiar with. Whereas DC made the bold decision, I think very bold decision, with Batman vs Superman, to allow the filmmaker to translate a graphic novel, an original graphic novel, not like a graphic novel that exists out there, but Chris Terrier's own original graphic novel, into a film that is a homage of DC's graphic novels in general. So that's my defense of that. So it's experimental, and it's actually fairly interesting, and I think it's a bold move, and that critics and filmmakers should actually be quite impressed, even if they think that it's a flawed approach that didn't quite work. They should at least applaud the attempt to try and undertake such an endeavor. A big thing for me, I'm going to move on to something else. A big thing for me is Lex Luthor. Now, was it badly cast? Yes, I think so. Now, I say that with some hesitation. I thought Lex Luthor as Jesse Eisenberg, or Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, was before I'd seen this movie, was the worst decision that anyone. I just didn't understand it. I could not wrap my head around it. And I liked Jesse Eisenberg. I didn't think he was bad at what he does. I mean, technically, I thought he was a bad actor because I just thought, you know what? He's always playing the same guy, and I don't think he has that much range. Having said that, I want to say two things. First of all, and really think about this now, is Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor not only more memorable than any Marvel villain to date, even Loki. I don't care what you say. Loki is almost the same character as fucking Ultron. He's the same character. He's the same. He's got very little difference. He's maybe got a little bit more depth, but ultimately he's a wisecracking, aristocratic, moustache twiddling villain. He's just the normal villain, and he doesn't really do anything, that makes me think, wow, this guy's such a fucking evil bastard, right? So, okay, I'll give you Loki. Loki's more memorable than Lex Luthor. Let's just give you Loki, okay? I'll give you Magneto. Definitely, I'll give you Magneto as well. I mean, especially with the new interpretation of Magneto by what's his face, Michael Fassbender. Definitely, I'll give you that. There are, but I want to stick just for now to Marvel villains. Now let's look at the range of Marvel villains there've been, and they've had some great actors in the roles of these Marvel villains. Which one sticks out in your head though, more than Lex Luthor in this movie? Whether you find him annoying or irritable or, not only are his actions incredibly sick. I mean, the guy pees in a fucking bottle and leaves it in the Senate on top. This guy thinks he owns the world. He lets his own secretary walk into a trap where he's bombing the fucking Senate. And by the way, a point about this, because this has often been a critique. Well, what was the point of him bombing the Senate? Was he supposed to be making Superman look bad? All of this kind of bullshit. Because it didn't make him look bad and they didn't mention it after. No, you fucking idiots. The reason he bombed the Senate was so he could get the kryptonite. Because the senator had blocked his ability to what do you call it? She basically stopped them being able to bring the kryptonite to America. So he was bombing the Senate to kill her, so he could get his hands on the kryptonite, the big block of kryptonite that he wanted. So, I mean, having said that, he wasn't trying to frame Superman for anything. That was the reason he brought the big block to the Senate. Okay? So, going back to the performance. Now, one might say the performance is flawed in places. I think people going on like he was acting like the Joker, absolutely absurd. He's far more memorable. He's far more despicable than a lot of the villains. I think he's very, very misunderstood because perhaps the way Jesse Eisenberg interpreted some of the dialogue was somewhat over the top. That he was an incredibly charismatic and memorable villain, who in fact was, unlike a lot of villains, was truly dastardly so that you hated him. You know, like you really didn't like him. I didn't like him. I was physically felt he was a revolting character, but in a good way, most of the time when he wasn't way over the top. But he didn't do that much. I think it was reined in most of the time in his performance. You know, would a better actor have taken those lines and taken that character and done something better with it? I think so. And would it have been better just to hire someone who wasn't so controversial for Lex Luthor, so that it didn't give people like me, who were haters, who don't like to admit that they were wrong, ammunition because one scene he played it over the top. He played a couple of scenes over the top, so he was all the time, you just couldn't. It's absurd. Jesse Eisenberg did a fine job, much better than I expected, and to be honest, exceeded to me his own talents in some ways, because he created a Lex Luthor that was interesting. It was comic accurate in a lot of ways. If you read Red Sun or something like that, the more fast-talking, nerdy, awkward version of the character, and it didn't. I loved the script as well, because the script was so subtle. It didn't have to force feed you the idea that this guy was a genius. It just let you know through the dialogue and his actions that he was such a genius. So I would say very, very few rare villains in movies have been in superhero movies have been as good as Lex Luthor. In movies in general, of course, but he's much better than any Lex Luthor that's ever been put to film, by the way. So there's the Joker, I would say, was better. Ozymandias from The Watchmen was better than this Lex Luthor. And I'm trying to think of, I'm sure there's some that have been as good or memorable, but most of them have been quite generic, and I thought this character was a memorable villain. He was much better than Zod, in my opinion. Far better than Zod. Now, would I ever prefer the smoother talking, more sophisticated, more charismatic, less socially awkward Lex Luthor in this movie? Yes, because it would have reminded me less the kind of Kevin Spacey and, the Lex Luthors we've seen in the past, which have been kind of jokes. It would have been nice to see for once, that other Lex Luthor that we're all familiar with as well, the one from Superman Birthright, or Birthright is actually more like the Lex Luthor in this movie, but the one from All-Star Superman, or the one from some of the other literature we've seen around Superman, or from the animated Justice League and animated Superman cartoon series. I would have liked to see that Lex Luthor for once. The charming Machiavellian, almost this super manipulative, um, almost, like genius businessman, smooth, charismatic, just has the world in the palm of his hands with just a vicious hatred of Superman. He's almost like Iago, you know, taking on Othello, just this hatred and jealousy of the fact that this undeserving thing somehow is better than him. And having almost no reason for this malice towards Superman. And I would have loved to see that. But to be frank, this movie kind of needed a little bit of levity. Could the levity have been found in somewhere else? Possibly, but I think Lex Luthor gave it a good dose of, and I enjoyed the performance. Now, I can understand why people might not have, but I think I'm going to end this thing. I'm going to say, first of all, I think Batman was brilliant as well. I'm not going to go too much into it, but I'm not apologizing to anyone, but I don't think he's the best Batman ever. I think he's probably as good as Keaton and as good as Bale. I don't think his performance far out exceeds them. I just think, the action scenes exceed them. But was he an actively bad Batman? No. And I loved the fact that the James Bond-esque stroke Dracula-esque kind of Batman was really cool. You had a Batman who, when he was Bruce Wayne, had an almost James Bondish swag about him, and the music, the score behind it really kind of brought that home. But this is like a kind of James Bond ladies' man. He swigs his martinis and drinks the bar dry, but still kills the bad guys. And I thought that was good. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much, and I thought Ben Affleck did a terrific job of portraying that. Do I think he was better than Michael Keaton? No, I think he was different. Do I think he was better than Christian Bale? No, especially in the Bruce Wayne aspect of it. Absolutely not, because I think Christian Bale is by far the most complex, interesting Batman put to screen, and it's in the performance that. Bruce Wayne put to screen. I think his Batman, let's just leave that alone. I understand the criticisms there, but his Bruce Wayne was interesting, very interesting. So that's good. The fight scenes with Batman in this much better than anything we've seen, although I would have wished he was still a little bit more stealthy, like in the Nolan movies, because I think that's more like Batman. But anyway, so Batman was good, and that's universally accepted. Is there anything more I want to say? As I said, the 28% doesn't make any sense to me. I've tried to get my head around it. I can't. 28%, I think of films like Spectre that I've seen. What a heartless, humorless, awful movie that betrayed everything that the first James Bond Casino in this recent series, Casino Royale, got right. And no one says anything about that. No one says anything about films like Prometheus, which were god-awful and a complete betrayal of the mythology of Alien. Why aren't these getting bashed? Why aren't these getting... If those got 28%, I would understand this getting 28%. Now, I'm not going to say the movie was perfect. I hated the Superman interpretation in this movie, although I was like, okay, at least I'll accept this Superman, since at least I'm enjoying the story in general. It's not Superman I know or like, but at least the story it's serving, he serves a purpose for that story. But truly, it broke my heart when the whole Senate is being bombed. And first of all, Superman doesn't even get to speak up for himself in the Senate. That pissed me off from the jump. And then secondly, the place explodes and he doesn't have a tear in his eye. He never smiles in the movie. You know, he's not. He should. If they had have let Superman be the lighter side of this movie, then you could have had that Machiavellian, sick, slick Lex Luthor that we always wanted. Superman could have been, and Clark Kent could have been that bit of levity in the movie, but instead they went the super serious route. And the thing that is the greatest tragedy about this is that Zack Snyder is the guy who did Night Owl, who is a perfect analog of Clark Kent. If you go back and watch the Watchmen, that is, you know, the way the guy whoever plays Night Owl plays Clark Kent, plays his civilian self in that movie. That's exactly who Clark Kent would be in the real world. The mild-mannered reporter who's a bit like, you know, kind of, and he'd be the guy saying, you know, whatever happened to the American dream, you know. And he could have made him, just molded him on that. And, you know, again, Ozymandias in that is probably the Lex Luthor that everybody wanted, and he's already done it. And so there's a lot of irony in that fact that in the Watchmen, he does the characters of Superman and Lex Luthor and even Batman to a degree more justice than he does in this movie. Now, but just as different characters. Another, you know, major critique. I don't like Batman killing. I don't think Superman killed in the beginning. I think again they expected the audience to realize he hadn't killed the guy. He just moved so fast he'd turn around, and he hadn't smashed him through the wall. But I don't even like the sense of Superman being that violent. You know, that kind of aggressive. I don't like the fact that he was so ineffective, that he didn't stop any bad guys, that he didn't smile when he was saving the kid from the fire. I don't understand why this Superman saves people. I don't understand his motivation. I don't understand him. And I have a problem with that, and I think that is a huge part of why this film has been so critically panned. And to that degree I understand it, but 28% is too much. I could understand 60, 65. I could understand that. 28, too much. I think it's 70% as a movie, by the way. Very, very flawed, but has some great moments in it, including the Batman moments. Hate the fact that Batman kills. Hate the fact that Wonder Woman's going to be killing in the next movie. You know, I don't understand why DC are so determined to have their superheroes kill. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why are you taking this route? It's like an alternate universe they're trying to create where Batman and Wonder Woman is the one who is supposed to be the one that kills out of the three, but only in extreme circumstances. She doesn't just kill like that. She's peaceful and loving. So I don't like that. And I don't like the fact that Batman is just killing like... That's his rule. That's what makes Batman Batman. I don't understand like how you can have Batman kill. But again, I take my comic book prejudice of how I should view the character and just say, well, did I enjoy this version of Batman? And I did. That's the fact of it. When he was murking all those guys in the car, I enjoyed it. So I can't really criticize it too heavily. I don't like it. It gives me a bad taste in my mouth that Batman is someone I've known who that's so central to his character. I mean, I remember the part in the Black Hood where he says, you know, something, the Red Hood where he says something along the lines of, you know, the reason he won't kill the Joker is precisely that, because he knows if he goes over that edge, he'll never be able to come back. So I don't like the fact that this Batman kills. I think it goes almost too much against the character, but the rest was done so well that it's hard to really even criticize that. So those parts bothered me. But altogether, I'm going to finish like this. I think the movie is not a perfect movie, but I do think that people are holding it to a higher standard than the rest of these comic book movies because it's Batman and Superman, and because it was them versing each other. Either to them it had to be the best movie ever, or it's trash. And that's not fair. These people are only human while making these movies. They're not going to see all the angles. I mean, some angles seem so obvious that they should have seen, like, don't cast Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Even if you think he's going to be really good, just don't. Because his performance, it's so Marmite, his kind of performance, that it's going to grate on people, because he really doesn't have enough range to completely create a whole new persona for Lex Luthor that's going to be distinct from him being Jesse Eisenberg. So don't do that. So that was a glaring mistake, even though I think actually it worked out pretty well. I think you just give the haters ammunition. I think you know, other things they could have done, you know, give Superman a little bit more character, let him have just a tiny bit of that, you know, old school American charm that Christopher Reeves had. You know, you don't have to make him the bumbling whatever, but he has to be the mild-mannered reporter that we all know and love, not this Abercrombie and Finch looking fucking emo Superman. It's just not, it doesn't work. He needs to have that. Clark Kent is the human side of Superman that allows audiences to connect to Superman. And Superman had to fucking smile. I'm sorry. I don't care if your movie's dark. He has to smile. He's not the same as Batman. This was like really super dark Superman. So almost to make Batman contrast with him, you had to make Batman like against Batman and be a killer and a mass murderer, which didn't make sense, because then why does he care so much about Superman if he's a mass murderer himself, you know? So there was a lot of contradictions in the motivations of the characters as well, because they'd made them so dark. And I think that was a problem with the story. I think the story was maybe a bit too subtle in areas. I do think the way they introduced other Justice League members was a bit, you know, like, I like the bit where Flash comes from the future and is into the dream, but I didn't get the dream sequences. I didn't get why Wonder Woman wasn't having those dream sequences, since she's the one who's the mythological character. Why should Batman be having dream sequences? Hopefully that will be explained in the future by some some character that, you know, can reach into the past and give Bruce Wayne these dreams, but within the context of the movie, it didn't really make sense. All these dream sequences, but I liked it because it was like a kind of graphic novel. That's what happened in the graphic novels. The films are split by weird dream sequences and people coming from the future and warning. So that was all like very, very comic booky. So on one hand, I didn't think it served the story very well and may have been a bit confusing and too subtle a reference for normal audiences to get. But on the other hand, it was cool visually. I mean, like Batman in the desert and all of that kind of stuff was actually very cool visually. So there are flaws in this movie, but they're all bold filmmaking decisions. Apart from the Superman thing, I just think he doesn't understand Superman. But apart from that, I think most of it is bold filmmaking decisions that were flawed. Should they have been reined in? I don't know, but I prefer DC go along the lines of letting their filmmakers, really try and make the best films about these characters, as long as they know their filmmakers love these characters. So, yeah, I mean, that's essentially my bit. I had to say it eventually on Superman versus Batman, and I hope it does profit. I hope this DC universe carries on. But I really wish. I hope Snyder, after this Justice League, leaves. Ultimately. But I hope that the spirit of the DC universe that they're trying to create, I hope they get it right, because then we will be getting really comic books on screen come to life, as opposed to film adaptations of these comic book characters. I don't think Snyder's the right man almost to do what his vision is, because his vision is very beautiful. One day we might see the true, alternate world DC graphic novel on screen, and maybe he'll do it in Justice League, who knows, and maybe with a little bit, lighter tone patches here and there, he might be able to achieve it with a little bit more success. But that's my piece on it. Nerdman out. And this has been With Enough Prep Time.